The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. This is our second webinar in our Declouding the Issue series. Today's topic is Storage Infrastructure Analytics, Quit Flying Blind. Today's speakers are Paresh Gupta, Technical Marketing Engineer at Cisco, and John Gentry, CTO at Virtual Instruments. Some quick housekeeping. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will send a link to view the presentation within a day. We are also accepting questions during the presentation, so feel free to use the question panel in your GoToWebinar panel. And we will also be doing answering the questions at the end as well. So at this point, I'd like to hand it over to John.
Thank you, Matt and Paresh. It's wonderful to have you on the call as well. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on what part of the world you're in. Very excited about this morning's topic because it really is a partnership between Virtual Instruments and Cisco that is going to drive change and deliver unparalleled infrastructure visibility. But before we get into that, I wanted to go into the subject or the topic title of this morning's call, and that was Stop Flying Blind. So what does that mean exactly? There are a lot of superheroes on this call, individuals that go above and beyond to ensure the performance and availability of their infrastructure. They've got budget, they're subject matter experts, they try to make the right decisions, try to get out in front of the issues and anticipate their company's needs, and yet they still hit the wall, most commonly in the form of a performance impacting event, or God forbid, an outage of some kind that drives a very hectic war room session. The reality is, no matter how well prepared you are, unless you have the visibility you need, you will run into challenges. It's not a blue sky. The modern data center is a system of scale and complexity that frankly has reached a point beyond human comprehension without the assistance of advanced insights and platforms. You have this promise of thousands of infrastructure services virtualized at all tiers, supporting highly varied application workloads. It's a multi-vendor scalable infrastructure, so this would be automatically redundant and load balancing, cloud connected and hybrid in nature. And yet the reality is that it's extremely complex. On top of those infrastructure services, you have thousands or tens of thousands of application services running, dozens of vendors and tools. The reality is, even if all the focus is on a tier 1 application and the performance, it's in a shared environment where a tier 3 app could be that noisy neighbor causing disruption. And finding that in the traditional tools that are domain specific and don't have intelligence built in can be incredibly challenging. What you need is an integrated, analytics-driven ecosystem. And that's what excites me about today's presentation, is this is not a single vendor solution we're talking about today. This is about two key strategic partners of yours coming together to deliver an integrated solution from the ecosystem. This is about Virtual Instruments and Cisco partnering to deliver MDS-based application-centric performance management. This is about fly-by-wire. And I don't know if a lot of you are familiar with that term, but when jets in the Air Force became too complex and too fast for humans to react effectively, they introduced advanced instrumentation and analytics on board to assist the pilot. That became known as flying by wire. And today we're going to talk about how to bring that concept to the infrastructure, how VI and Cisco will enable the end-to-end instrumentation, the wire data, and the analytics required to fly by wire and vastly simplify overall infrastructure performance management. A quick overview of the Virtual Wisdom architecture. As you can see, we collect data from a number of sources. Our focus on today's call will be the integration with Cisco's MDS and that wire data. But we can combine that data with intelligence we gather from the switching infrastructure and the host infrastructure to create a context or correlated view, apply machine learning for three fundamental use cases. And that is application service assurance, which we'll go into in depth in our case study at the end of this presentation, workload and capacity optimization, which are always challenges, and obviously problem resolution and avoidance when, God forbid, something does go sideways. A couple of points around the virtual wisdom solution that drove Cisco and VI to partner. We've been processing wire data for 10 years now, and there's an element of massive ingest and correlation required. And so the exciting thing today is Cisco's enabling that through software-enabled hardware, but we're still going to be the ingest and correlation engine that can drive intelligence around health, utilization, and performance from the VM to the backend data. And beyond that, I did talk about the fact that it's an ecosystem. And so not only are we integrated with Cisco on a hardware infrastructure perspective, but we're sharing context with App Dynamics from an application performance management perspective, and integrated with ServiceNow for ITSM automation and clean workflow. It's not about one vendor answering everything for you as customers. It's about the vendors that are critical to your ecosystem coming together to help you solve problems and deliver service levels and performance assurance. So what's different now that VI and Cisco have partnered? Well, historically, if you're familiar with the virtual wisdom solution, to get to that wire data, to enable that fly-by-wire performance and agility, you had to leverage what was called a TAP, or traffic access point, and a hardware-based probe that would do the initial data extraction and calculation. That's what that FC wire data was. And as you can see by this image, it required not only physical equipment, but also secondary cabling, rack space, cable management, and very precise cable to probe precision. Today, with Cisco's hardware-enabled, software-enabled MDS 9700 with the SAN telemetry streaming enabled, we're getting that FC wire data directly from the MDS. No additional cabling required, no taps required, and no probes, hardware probes required. They're feeding that directly to the virtual wisdom platform that's doing the high capacity data ingest and correlation. This allows you to select where you want to deploy that intelligence. It can make it pervasive, and it's always on. To talk a little bit more about the MDS 9700, I'm going to hand it over to you, Paresh.
Hey, thank you, John. So, just continuing the thoughts from John, he just explained how exactly the fiber channel wire data can be streamed to virtual wisdom software. So, if we do a double click on that and try to understand how exactly that's working, the way we are doing it is by integrating all that solution within our storage networking infrastructure, or by integrating that capability within that module. John, do you want to go to the previous slide once? Yeah, I want to spend some time there just to clarify the context. Now, what you see here on the screen, it's the new fiber channel module from Cisco on the MDS 9700 directors. It provides you 4 speed capabilities. So the point here is that the telemetry capability is independent of the speed. You can run at 4, 8, 16, or 32 gigabit fiber channel, and still your telemetry information can be captured. Along with that, I also want to make sure that the point about high performance and 100% visibility is well captured. Now, this capability, and I'll talk in 2 minutes about that how exactly we are making it work, but this capability is integrated within the ports of MDS 9700 system. That means we are going to capture every single packet of every flow at every speed. There's no sampling involved anymore. And why that is important? Because unless you're monitoring 100% of your fabric, you're not being really proactive there. Because let's say if you do 90% monitoring, and what happens? The problem happens and rest 10% of your fabric, right? So that's the direction we are trying to take here, that monitor everything to provide you 100% visibility. Not just that, this whole solution scales seamlessly. Why? Because to build your storage infrastructure, you have to connect cables from the switches of your storage fabric. And because this capability is natively integrated on the ports, you get the capability where the cables are connected, right? So, it's easier said than done that, a lot of questions pop up that, these switches, these fiber channel switches that Cisco has been building for maybe 16 or 17 years now, what suddenly changed inside them that along with the usual switching of the frames, now we are able to perform line rate inspection also, right? It sounds easier, but it's from engineering point of view, it was a very heavy lifting. And why it's heavy lifting? It's because the architecture, the beauty of the architecture that you see on the screen. Now, to explain the architecture, I generally divide this into 3 big buckets. The first big bucket is how we collect the data on the wire. So for that purpose, we have the latest generation of fiber channel ASICs. These ASICs have inbuilt tap inside those. So along with switching of the frames from one port to another, these ASICs also perform a deep packet inspection of every single frame without any performance or feature penalty. After the inspection, these ASICs collect the fiber channel and SCSI headers and send that to an onboard network processing unit. This network processing unit, or NPU in short, is a high performance packet processor. It looks inside the fiber channel and SCSI headers, performs the correlation, and brings out a lot of storage-centric metrics that you have been seeing till now on Virtual Wisdom software. And finally, this NPU streams this data out to an external analytics and visualization engine. And if you want to take a guess, what is this external analytics and visualization engine? This is where exactly the power of virtual instruments come, that, this software, this analytics software, which we call it Virtual Wisdom, has been around for more than a decade. And the kind of intelligence that it has inside it, it's just unmatchable, right? So this data that we natively capture on the switches, we send it to Virtual Wisdom, and this is where it brings out the end-to-end correlation of a fabric view visibility in a single pane of glass. Now, a couple of points I want to highlight here, right? Like if you are trying to run parallels with the existing infrastructure, think about the hardware tabs and your probes natively integrated within the switch itself. And your Virtual Wisdom software continue to exist because that is where it's going to receive data from your fiber channel workloads, along with your VMs, your servers, and your storage arrays, right? So that was about architecture, but do not assume that you have to get limited to particular hardware module, or you have to have the greatest or the latest. No, that's not true. We have made it extremely flexible. So as you can see, one of the options to deploy this, or let's say if you have already invested or you are still running the previous generation hardware and you want to do a jump start on this new capability, one of the option is you can deploy it on storage edge. And because anyway, your end-to-end traffic between your compute and storage layer passes through the storage edge, you get the visibility there. The second option could be you use these new modules with the integrated telemetry capability as ISLs. And because these new modules also provide you highest speed of 32 gigabit fiber channel, you use double the speed along with the deep visibility into your traffic. Or the third option is, which I would say is the best, is deploy everywhere. But guess what? You don't really have to do that, right? And this is the point I want to try to convey here, that the flexibility is so that you decide where you want to enable the solution and when you want to enable the solution. So overall,
Paresh,
I would say,
John.
Sure.
And I just wanted to highlight for the audience, in my experience with 9 years here at Virtual Instruments, one of the biggest challenges in understanding the scope of any deployment was, where does that tier 0 or tier 1 workload reside in the shared infrastructure, and where do we need to deploy those taps and probes to deploy them in the most mission critical environment? And some customers would be very selective, others would take the Murphy's Law route and instrument everywhere. But one of the challenges was we always instrumented at the storage edge. So unless you had dedicated storage for a given app, you really needed to take down, entire arrays. And what's exciting about this and talking to customers is they could now, go after a single app by instrumenting at the host edge, or go after a certain, aspect or area of the data center by going and instrumenting those ISLs. And because it's software enabled, those choices can be very flexible and dynamic. And so this is an area where, just in speaking with customers, the flexibility that Cisco's built in by software enabling this capability in the MDS line is just very compelling and exciting to them. I think it really does live up to that anywhere or everywhere mantra that you've been talking about.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. I think the whole intention here is to turn it into proactive. I mean, when that phone rings, are you aware there's a problem, or is that your first step of troubleshooting, right? That's the questions we are trying to chase here. So, by making it so flexible so that you can deploy it anywhere or everywhere, really leads you into that direction. Okay, so moving forward, I would just, make one another point that, if you look at the history, John, you at Virtual Instruments have been doing, like, as far as my knowledge goes, more than 10 years. And every single large enterprise customer I've talked to, they are fan of your virtual system environment, right? And that's where, my personal interest, got popped up into this particular area. And when, a few years back at Cisco, we started investing into this integrated telemetry capability on our switches, I thought it would be best for, the best of software, which is virtual wisdom, and the best of SAN infrastructure, to come together and offer the capability to our customers to, solve their problems and make their operations more proactive.
No, I couldn't agree with you more, Paresh. And it really is about those key partners of the customer working together. And we heard that loud and clear. And that is really central here. This was very much a customer-driven partnership. Obviously, there's natural synergies in kind of our experience on SAN performance management for over a decade of investment, together with the highly advanced and innovative capabilities of the MDS line. And what this really, customers are huge fans when they see the value of the combined solution, but they wanted it more broadly in their estate. They wanted it simpler, easier, and that's really what this partnership brings to fruition. So, as customers leverage that 32 gig module, whether they're instrumenting at the storage edge and just upgrading that connectivity, or they're deploying at their ISLs, what do we do with that data? Just a quick reminder from a VI and Cisco together. We're now looking at the Cisco MDS line there between the servers and the storage. Just to expand, Virtual Wisdom combines that wire data with the data that we're getting from the management interface on the MDS line, the health and utilization data, in this case for both FC and FCOE. So if you have UCS with FCOE converged modules connecting into an MDS or into a Nexus and then an MDS, we will see from a software perspective that traffic from the edge all the way back, and then correlate that to the wire data we're seeing on the FC links between the MDS and the storage. We'll combine that with data that we're capturing from the host side, whether you're running vSphere or Hyper-V or Power VM from AIX. And then we also do support software-defined storage like vSAN and Scale.io, so that you can get one view into your mission-critical infrastructure that's really enabled by those various ecosystem providers, collected, correlated, and analyzed by Virtual Wisdom. So this really is an exciting combination, because now it's an entirely software-based solution and software-enabled on the MDS line of switching. We take that data and correlate it into an application-centric view. So one of the challenges we heard loud and clear starting about 3 or 4 years ago, as infrastructure was starting to transform from silo-based deployments across server network storage to infrastructure as a service and private cloud offerings, was our customers asking us, how do you give us the intelligence to talk to our customers, to talk to the application owners and the business units in a language that they understand, in a context that they're familiar with. And that's really what the application centricity or app-centric approach enables. We're actually going to discover and tag that traffic and the correlations in the environment between VM and LUN to a specific application, understand the interdependencies and the components of that application, and paint it for our customers in a topology view that only focuses on the elements of that shared infrastructure that are supporting that specific application, and then allows us to identify abnormal behavior or put right on screen, warning signs, red, yellow, green of what may be causing performance issues, show all of the components supporting a given application or set of applications. It's very flexible. It has an understanding of the business importance or tier in which an application resides. But for me, having been in the industry quite some time now, I remember the days when we would take a network diagram and use a massive plotter to print a topology view that would consume an entire wall and was out of date by the time the printer stopped printing it. And by taking an application-centric view, now we're just picking out the pieces of that massive infrastructure that are relevant to the conversation you're having, relevant to the application owner on the other line saying they have a new feature rolling out or new workload they need to support, or relevant to the business unit that's asking, hey, what's happening with the seasonality or cyclical nature of my application? And so we built analytics to process that data focused on 3 real use cases. I'm going to go into depth about seasonal trending because to my mind, that's what really enables an application-centric perspective on infrastructure performance. But obviously, we've got advanced analytics for problem resolution and avoidance, things like Event Advisor and Trend Matcher that identify anomalies and then correlate those to other causal parts of the environment. And we have analytics for workload and capacity management, analytics that actually leverage simulation and forecasting to help things like coordinate where VMs should be placed across a cluster, or how to better divide the logical partitions in an AIX power box to get the most out of the CPU memory and I/O. Balance Finder, do I have balanced workload in my environment? Or Storage Port Balancer, which is not just about looking at utilization and balancing utilization across those front end points, but with today's high-speed back-end storage, everything moving to flash, speeds going up, and massive shared workloads, it's about actually looking not just at utilization, but also understanding, what's the profile of that workload? What's the frame size? Is it a read or is it a write? Is it sequential or random? And how can I cluster workloads that are complementary so that I'm not putting a large block read I/O down the same port that I'm trying to do high-speed, small block queries? And it actually takes all those characteristics into consideration, characteristics that are actually defined by the data we're capturing from the MDS. So the MDS is actually looking at that traffic and characterizing the workload profile, handing us that metric data for us to use within the analytics to define, hey, here's a better way to balance the workload or rezone your fabric to get the most out of that investment you've made in new 32 gig infrastructure. And when it comes to talking to the business, seasonal trending is really the next generation of machine learning applied to infrastructure management. So one of the challenges our customers brought to us early in the day was, I love the fact that we can do thresholding and alerting and get proactive and out in front of problems, but what's the right threshold to set? And so we have a large professional services organization, a lot of applied experience, and we could make those best practice recommendations, but every environment is unique. Seasonal trend actually looks at the traffic over time, runs regressions against it, and learns what is normal for a given application or a given environment, and then allows you to actually alert to deviations from normal. So in this particular case, we're saying, for average read and write completion time, based on I/O size, what do I want? I want to alert if I see 2 standard deviations. If anything varies by 2 deviations, I want to know about it because that's indicative of a change. And I want to be able to be proactive about finding out what is that change. So imagine that the shift in operations when instead of receiving the call from the database administrator saying, hey, my storage is slow, you actually make the call to the database administrator saying, hey, this morning, the query workload from your database went up by 2 standard deviations over what is normal for the second Tuesday of February. Just a massive shift in the ability to have that intelligent discussion around a specific app and have the data to enable you to not fly blind, but literally fly by wire. We then take that detailed view, that operator's view, and roll it up, because the other challenge is, how do I communicate with my executive management that everything is red, yellow, or green? And so in addition to the detailed dashboards that allow you to investigate problems, investigate alerts, look at trends, perform root cause analysis, we summarize everything in application and role-specific dashboards that allow you to quickly determine, what are all the components supporting this particular business unit? Is there anything that I should be aware of? What are my watch list applications, and who has the best performance or the worst performance? How many open cases do I have? And this allows us to deliver fast ROI from custom dashboards that expose to executive management, how the infrastructure is performing to support what they care about, which is their business. And the one that I always laugh about is up in the top left there, where we do measure mean time to resolution through our integration with ServiceNow. And that's always the tile on this dashboard that our customers want hidden until they can show a definitive decline in MTTR. So these dashboards are flexible. You can take one of these metrics off or put it on and really manage how you want to provide that level of visibility to the various functional leaders in your organization. And there's several sort of use cases that this can be applied to. And Paresh and I are going to talk specifically about one of our joint customers that was really instrumental in driving this partnership and defining not only how we should come together, but what metrics were important to capture on that integrated ASIC with SAN telemetry, and how we should be then correlating and analyzing them. So we're going to dig in a little bit more into the application performance use case. But as you can see, infrastructure optimization, which everyone's being asked to do more with less. Where do I deploy new applications? How do I provision my storage? How do I manage change? And when there is an issue, what are my forensics capabilities for investigating these things? And Paresh, I'm sure you've heard from the same customers and others, these are the areas they want us to help enable and focus on through, software-enabled intelligence in the hardware.
Oh yeah, exactly. No doubt about that, John. I mean, in my personal view, the performance of the application, that remains number one ask. And there's more that we do on that, the more it would be welcome by our customers.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this is where creating that dialogue, because the challenge I've heard from some of our customers is, the app team says they need high performance, but you ask them to define what that means in terms of infrastructure response time, and they're not sure, right? So application performance is where the end measure is. You could almost say that's an umbrella over all these other categories, because to get application performance, you have to have an optimized infrastructure where the storage is provisioned correctly, like I mentioned in that storage port balancer, where you're deploying applications on the right tier of infrastructure, and that where you have the analytics and forensics when there is an issue to resolve it quickly. So we're going to talk about a national wireless telecom provider. Did you have something else you want to add?
No, I was just about to, double click on your point that, it's extremely important to define performance, right? Like, you ask question that what performance means to 10 people and you'll have 10 different answers, right? So that's where the real motive comes, that what exactly is meant by performance. And I guess that's what our solution is here to offer.
Yeah, and one of the things that this particular customer is excited about, this is a national wireless telecom provider. It's been a strategic customer for both Cisco and Virtual Instruments for a number of years. And they came to us jointly and said, look, we want to deliver the industry's best performance-based SLAs, but we need to do that specific to each line of business. We need something that will support legacy while we introduce new tech. And that's kind of the realization of this benefit. They need to optimize across all the tiers and support high levels of growth with not the linear infrastructure spend. And one of the things that they said specifically is, hey, we've used virtual instruments to support our customer-facing tier 0 application infrastructure for years. But we have no idea until we deploy that workload in that environment how it's going to perform or affect the other stuff running. If we could software enable the switching infrastructure in our tier 1 and tier 2 and test dev environments, we could actually know well in advance. And that's actually where they're looking to deploy the latest MDS. So they made two decisions to help meet those requirements. One, deploy best-in-class infrastructure. And that's really where, the providers in their environment, Cisco in particular, is best of breed. And then instrument the end-to-end system. And historically, they've done that with taps and probes and virtual instruments. Now they can do that with software across both environments. And then ensure a highly collaborative process. I mean, they actually have tight integration. The individual that owns the application environment and the individual that owns the infrastructure report to the same leader and work hand in hand on a daily basis. And what they were actually able to do as a result was deliver best-in-class sub 0.5 millisecond SLA on read and writes for tier 0 apps. This means that when they get an order in a retail store or online, they can process that order and provision that capability faster than anybody else. But they're doing that in a virtualized environment that's also supporting tier 1, 2, and 3, where they don't have that same millisecond requirement. So they're able to manage that according to the needs of each given app. That also allowed them, through collaboration, to understand what was required from a development and what was required from an infrastructure perspective to support that development and accelerate the cycle time for introducing new capabilities, new promotions. I mean, the wireless world is extremely competitive, and if they can introduce a new feature or a new program faster than the competition, they can drive loyalty to their end customers, which obviously means their internal business unit customers are highly supportive and loyal. And really, this call is the direct result of that collaboration extending beyond their internal ops, dev, and apps teams, and actually involving their key vendor partners, both the ones that are on this call today in Cisco and VI, but also other vendors in their environment that have come together in the ecosystem to make sure that we're delivering solutions to this customer, not just point devices or point environments. I know that this individual sits on your technical advisory board. Paresh, any comments on kind of what they challenged Cisco to deliver and how the MDS is really the realization of that?
Oh yeah, I can share the real story, right? It goes back around like 18 months. That was the first time, we shared this architecture that I just talked about a few minutes back with this customer. And they were so bullish about it that, they wrote an email to me and, Art Scrimo, my colleague here. And that customer really chased us down that Cisco and VI, we want you to do this because you guys have done two great things, but it would be better if you guys come along, right? So, I would say it's a really customer-driven partnership for a collective win.
Yeah, and I think that's very much summed up in the quote that the leader of that group provided for this call. They've been, using our combined technologies in earnest for quite a while. They've been asking for us to partner more heavily for quite a while, beyond just, making sure we're working together, actually integrate so that they can, lessen the burden on their infrastructure and have really a software-enabled, always-on capability. And for them, it's pretty straightforward. They can go broader and wider, and they can do it simply and more cost-effectively. And if there's one theme I've heard all along, it's I love this capability. How can we make it easier, and how can we make it less expensive and more cost-effective? And that really is the outcome of the partnership with Cisco. Obviously, again, there's three fundamental use cases here. Problem resolution and avoidance is always underlying, and when things go sideways or you do hit that wall, The ability to see around it and get through it quickly becomes mission critical. But when you're not in that fire state, being able to optimize workload and capacity, be intelligent about workload placement, drive higher utilizations against the infrastructure while maintaining performance levels, and then be able to represent the performance you are delivering in the forms of service assurance and SLAs in a context that the business owners understand in terms of that application-centric or application-aware view. These are the reasons why people are deploying virtual wisdom layered on top of intelligent software-enabled hardware infrastructure in the MDS line. Any final comments, Paresh, before we open it up to question and answer?
Yeah, I would just say that, one of the points that you made in between that, trying to be more proactive and, get the 100% visibility, I think that's extremely important because, think of our new storage environments, right? Like, all flash arrays are popping up and these all flash arrays have enormous amount of power. We send a read request and the response is instantaneous, right? They are able to send traffic at line rate. And that sounds great. But when we deploy these new systems, there are new challenges like SAN congestion, slow drain, things like oversubscription. Now these are the problems we have defined because we had the visibility. But when people see the problem on the very first time, it's like I would use the same quote that we start flying blind, right? And we do not want that to happen. So that's why this whole solution of 100% visibility at line rate in real time, being analyzed and visualized under virtual wisdom, I think that's where the power of this whole solution comes in.
Yeah, you make a great point around the power of Flash. And, a lot of people, certainly a lot of the individuals in the executive office reading the article say, if we just deploy Flash, all our performance challenges will go away. And if you don't do so very purposely with clear visibility, all you've really done is accelerated the speed at which you will reach the point of the accident, right? That this is a system. It runs from, VM efficiency and things like CPU weight and congestion or memory contention, down across fabric and buffer credit starvation and flow control, all the way back to the array where you're looking at not just the speed of the drive, but also, what is my controller doing? And am I congested at a control level or at a port or IO level? So seeing that whole system and the ability to look at it from the host, the ISL, and the storage perspective, really, it takes that blindfold off and says, I have clear visibility and I can deploy my workloads and take real advantage and make the most of that Flash array. One anecdote, we have a customer that migrated to all Flash and actually ended up collaborating with the database administrators to change the way they packaged queries because the arrays are optimized for large volume, small block IO. And so a simple shift in just the way the DBA packaged the queries could double. And obviously, there's not just one customer out there. This is a snapshot of the virtual wisdom customer base. Obviously, Cisco's fairly ubiquitous in these accounts. Not all are Cisco MDS customers, but we hope over time they'll all see the innovation that Cisco's delivering and the ability to expand their VI footprint without the need for taps and probes, but just with software-enabled instrumentation of the storage environment. And so with that, I'd like to thank you again, Paresh, for joining me today, and thanks to all of the supporting cast over at Cisco. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with. I'm excited because we're actually, putting this out into the wild and realizing these benefits for customers now. And I just think we're gonna see a share shift in the industry towards saying, hey, you know what? I've got to have this level of visibility. But I'll turn it back to our moderator to see if we have any questions that have come in and really open it up. Looks like we do have a few.
Yeah, we do. Thank you, John. Thank you, Paresh. Let's see. The first question. I know Brocade has been offering something that is competitive called AMP, Analytics Management Platform. How does this compare?
That's That's a great question. I'll actually take that one, Paresh, because I obviously virtual instruments is deployed in not just Cisco environments, but a number of Brocade environments. The primary difference here is that the AMP is an external processing device. So Brocade is sending a copy of the light via virtual tap over to an external device called an AMP to do the processing, where Cisco's doing that processing right on board, right on that line card. So again, a truly software-enabled solution versus requiring additional hardware. The other big difference is the detail or the extent to which Cisco works with VI customers to understand, out of all the metrics available, what are the ones that are most important to you? Because obviously you can't capture everything out of the gate. So really being selective and working with that large telco as an example to say, of the 300 metrics that the VI collects natively, what are the 30 that are the most important that we need to enable on this ASIC? So you've got, a more elegant solution. It's also considerably more scalable, and it's really focused on what the customers value as opposed to kind of a random sampling of the data that's available. Paresh, I don't know if you've had any inquiries around this as a differentiator from Brocade's AMP product, but anything you want to offer or add there?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. One point I would add to that, the solution from Cisco that you have, it's truly based on an open and programmable architecture. Even though we took many months to finalize the business part of this partnership, but technically, Virtual Wisdom was able to capture the data from MDS switches and show it nicely within 3 weeks, right? Why? Because MDS switches are sending this data out in industry-leading open formats, right? So it's not a closed architecture. Anybody can use it. Everybody can use it.
A great point, Paresh.
All right, so we have another question. If I've already started to upgrade my environment to 32G, but wasn't aware of this capability, how can I try out the telemetry streaming? Is it software or do I need new hardware?
Okay, so let me take that on. So couple of points. Number one, you mentioned you have already started upgrading to 32 gig fiber channel. If that is true, all you need is a new software to enable this capability. Why? Because you have to have the 32 gigabit hardware once in end-to-end data path. So if you remember one of the slides that I used, you could have this new hardware on the storage edge, you could have it at the core, or you can have it everywhere, but it has to have at least once in the end-to-end data path. Once you have this hardware, all you need to do is execute 2 commands on the switch to enable this capability. It's that simple. So yeah, that's my answer to it.
Okay, let's see. We have another one. I've evaluated Virtual Wisdom in the past, and it was expensive, and I really didn't want to tap. Does this solution address both those concerns?
I could take that one, obviously, because I mentioned that in the presentation context. I would say this combined solution is very much about both of those concerns. So obviously, we've gone into detail about how it's streamed directly from the switch to Virtual Wisdom, thus eliminating the need for both the taps and the probes. But it's also then eliminating the need for the hardware investment, the cable infrastructure investment. And obviously, we want to make this anywhere or everywhere. So it's a more aggressive licensing scheme as well. We're not going to go into detail on how it's licensed today. I see a couple other questions that are related to the licensing. I would really encourage anyone who's interested in understanding the licensing to contact your local virtual instruments and Cisco sales teams, because it's really dependent on how you want to architect the solution, whether you want to go after that storage edge or the ISLs or everything. That really drives how we recommend you build out the switching environment and the software implementation associated with that environment. But certainly more cost effective was a key driver in the partnership, certainly.
Okay. And let's see. I have a couple other questions here really quick. Let's let's see, let me just kind of read here. What version of VI is needed to get the information from the Cisco MDS 9700s?
That'll be Virtual Wisdom 5.6, which will GA at the end of the month.
Okay, got it. And let's see, we have another one. What does the Cisco hardware offer VI that VI didn't have sight into before?
I'll start with that one, Preston. I'll hand it off to you. So it actually isn't that there's sight into something we didn't have before. It's actually the ability to gain it on a much more broad basis, and that a lot of the pre-processing work that was done historically on the probes is now done on the MDS line. So we're seeing metrics that we've always seen. We're just seeing them where they've been analyzed and calculated on the MDS switch with the intelligence there and handed to us as outputs or data as opposed to raw feeds. And the ability to do that with software only through the integration as opposed to requiring taps and probes and the associated hardware infrastructure. So it's less about something net new and more about better packaging of raw data into metrics, meaningful metrics, and the ability to get to those metrics seamlessly in the environment. And the exciting thing is this isn't a point-in-time partnership between VI and Cisco. With our 5.6 being released soon and the release of the first generation of the software or firmware that enables this feature, we are already, from an engineering perspective, collaborating on the next set of metrics, the next expansion of that metric set and the next set of use cases. So this is something that I think you'll see continue to develop and advance over time. Paresh, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, if I may take the liberty of rephrasing this question, I think it's not really a question of what you could look into. It's really a question of how you could look into. I mean, you could have extreme deep visibility using taps and probes, but then we know the challenges with deploying of those external, devices. But now we have integrated all of that within the storage networking switches, right? That means nothing new on your data center floor, right? So that brings a lot of, site advantages, like you can scale it, you can afford it, you make it so simple, as I said, just like enable it like 2 commands, right? So I think that's where the power comes, that how you deploy the solution and how do you operate it for a long duration.
A great way to reframe that.
Okay, we have time for one more question. What is the outlook for the HPC environments in this context?
Well, I mean, in my experience, traditional high-performance compute, massive scale, obviously, but this is an infrastructure solution. So it would apply to HPC workloads as much as it would to any traditional business workload, provided it's fiber channel, SAN attached infrastructure.
Okay, great.
And then there was just one other question around scale that I wanted to address. So, again, Virtual Wisdom has been, monitoring large-scale mission-critical environments for over 10 years. And one of the challenges we had to solve early on was how do you handle, massive amounts of data, hundreds of millions of metrics per second coming off of line rate fiber channel, and do so at the scale of a major telco or a major financial or insurance company. And so the real challenge there was how do we prevent you from having to build an infrastructure to monitor your infrastructure? And so just to give you a sense of scale, the Virtual Wisdom Platform Appliance, which was the yellow box on that diagram, we have customers supporting entire data centers in a single 2U appliance. And that's, we're talking about millions of initiator target LUN relationships. But when you look at environments that are instrumented or enabled with software virtualization or storage virtualization technologies, it's a natural multiplier on the number of ITLs in those environments. And, obviously we need to see all of it. So we've literally the ability to understand in millions of of flows or ITLs in a single 2U appliance. And then that work is obviously distributed out across the switching infrastructure. So, we're building at scale that aggregates the scale capabilities of each individual MDS from a flow or ITL inspection perspective.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like we've reached our time limit. There were a couple of questions on, let's see, anything else? Nope, looks like we got it. Anything that we didn't get to, we'll be sure to follow up via email. John, Paresh, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And please look for an email tomorrow with a link to view the replay. At this time, this concludes the webinar.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Paresh.
Pleasure.